So, as you can see, we start by adding our yeast onto our desired flour, whether it is whole wheat flour, white flour, type 00 flour, just make sure it has at least 12 grams of protein. Then we pour most of the water, freezing cold water, but we leave some for later, and we start by kneading at the lowest speed for some time until everything gets incorporated well, and then we slightly increase the speed of the machine and we continue kneading it. And when the dough is ready, we add the salt into the middle of the dough and all of the remaining water, or just some, depending on where you are at your kneading process and how much water you poured in before. And when you add the salt, you increase the speed significantly at a very high speed for the next 2 to 3 minutes so the salt can dissolve properly. And after the time, you decrease the speed again and you continue kneading. So here, after 9 minutes totally, I started by adding around half the amount of the oil, waiting until it gets incorporated into the dough, and started adding the remaining oil. Or for me now, I left some and I decided to increase the speed to help the oil get incorporated properly and build some strength, some gluten. And here I poured all of the remaining oil into the dough, and I decided to decrease the speed and just keep kneading it on low speed, checking the temperature always. You don't want to go over like 25 degrees. So I aim for 23 to 24 degrees. And as you saw, I was in 23.3 degrees. And that is how you take the dough out of the machine. With your hands, you cut it. You don't just drag it out, but you cut it like mozzarella. With so small batches, if it's a big batch, then you take a dough scraper or a knife. But here you see the big chunk of dough is on top, and the rest I put it beneath, and we check the gluten. We can see through it. It doesn't tear. That is a good sign. So the gluten is built properly. And after you've taken all the dough out, you build the gluten. So you fold the dough into himself, and yeah, you can see it pretty well here. And after that, you take the dough and you put it inside the bowl and you cover it or close it airtight. It's very important. And like that, we leave it at room temperature for around 11 hours to 30 minutes to 12 hours, depending on your room temperature. So here I also show you how to knead the dough by hand, because this differs a little bit. And here I'm using sourdough, so no yeast. That's why I first dissolve the sourdough starter with water. If you would use yeast, it would be the same. Flour, put the yeast in, and then all of the ingredients. So here I use all of the ingredients at the same time with the salt, everything at the same time. And I start by mixing it with a little spoon, and then I start using my hand first in the bowl, and when everything is well incorporated, I put the dough on my counter and continue kneading it there. And as well as with the machine, we check the temperature and we aim for the same temperature. And here I was slightly above 24.5 degrees, which is still perfectly fine. And we do the same. We build up some tension and we put the dough inside the bowl or wherever, just airtight. So this is the dough after 12 hours. For me it was around 23 to 24 degrees. It was pretty hot. And I put some water on the counter so it doesn't stick, and if you desire, you can also cover the dough with a damp cloth or put some olive oil and cover cover it with a plastic wrap to just prevent the dough from drying out. And we cut the dough with a dough scraper, very important, not just by hand, you need a dough scraper. And we measure the dough. And so the dough, as you can see on the counter, it's upside down. The dough is upside down. Because when we turned it with the bowl, the top side went down. So the top side of the dough faces the counter right now. And I do 275 grams of dough balls always. This is important. If you have too much dough, you cut dough out. If you need more dough, you just cut it and put it. And that's how you do it basically. And this was with the sourdough dough balls, and I'm showing you how to do that. 2 methods. This is still upside down, so that's why you can see I'm turning it. So now the top side is on top. That is important too. Doing some tension as we did before, and this time we close it at the bottom. This is important. The bowl should be closed, sealed properly. And then I put it in some oiled plates. That is a way of storing the dough if you don't have a lot. This is the other method you saw. I turned the dough, so now it's top on top. And we just push the dough with our hands. We turn the dough and push it inside. And we build tension on the surface. That's our goal. You don't need too much, just a little bit. And then we seal the dough properly, always. And that's basically it. Put it inside our plate, cover it airtight. And the other way, of course, is with normal pizza boxes, no oil, no semolina flour, nothing. Just like that, close it airtight, or like that. That is also a method, of course. And like that, we leave the dough balls for rest around 9 hours. Meanwhile, after we did portion the dough, we cut the mozzarella. And I use like a drainer. And I cut the mozzarella. I have like some cheese cutter, which I bought recently. And I place the mozzarella inside of there. I place a cloth. This is also very important. There are different methods. I'm just showing you how I'm doing it so the mozzarella can drain. And because it leaves a lot of water and you don't want this water of the mozzarella on your pizza. That's why I cut it. And this time I just left it for 3 hours because I forgot I cut it before. So it didn't have much water in the bowl, but you can see the cloth is completely wet. Now, coming to the tomatoes, we use whole tomatoes, not seasoned or anything. A good brand. Now here you see me use San Marzano. Many say, oh, you have to use San Marzano. I'm telling you, I tried many tomatoes and you can just as well use, for example, Pelati tomatoes. And measure the salt around 1.2 to 1.25 grams per 100 grams of tomatoes. I used totally 800 grams of tomatoes here. And now, if you want to, you can also add basil into the tomato sauce. When I started making pizza, I used to do that. Now I stopped doing that because I add the basil when I top my pizza, and I like the tomato sauce just rare, fresh tomatoes, just salt. You can also add a little bit of olive oil if you want to. And when you add basil, for example, you can do the tomato sauce like 1 day earlier and put it into the fridge. So it really gives the tomato sauce a nice flavor of the basil. And before baking the pizza, you take it out of the fridge, and let it come to room temperature for around 3 hours or 4 hours, and before you use it for baking it. And yeah, now a big discussion also is whether you should crush the tomatoes by hand, or, for example, with a food mill. so you avoid breaking the seeds and therefore don't risk of making the sauce bitter. Traditionally, that's how most people would make it, the sauce. Now, me personally, I tried both methods, all methods, and I come to the conclusion that using a blender doesn't make the sauce bitter when you use it correctly, when you don't kill the tomatoes, when you don't overdo it and make like brrr, you know, control it and just use it as I'm doing it right now. You see the salt is in, and I just blend it sometimes, and then I mix it a little bit. I see where are big chunks of tomatoes. I don't want them, so I just make a little blend, and like that, tomato sauce is perfect. I never had to add sugar, it never was bitter, nothing. And that's all you have to do.
To show you the tips to make the best pizza at home. The oven has been warming up for about 30 minutes before cooking the pizza, but most of the time you put the stone like this, on the bottom or in the middle, which is wrong. I always use the stone, and be careful to do this step because this is super important, but also helps cooking the pizza at a better way. Position the stone all the way on the top, and then I'm gonna go ahead and fix the oven on the broil at the max. Okay guys, like you can see now the pizza is ready to go in the oven, but before putting the pizza in the oven, let's go ahead and grab the stone. Always be careful because it's gonna be super hot, and let's position exactly the pizza stone in the middle of the oven. It's 260 Celsius, which is perfect to cook the pizza. Little bit of flour on top like this, on the spatula. You have to have a spatula to make a pizza. If you don't have a spatula, go ahead and buy one, because this is very, you have to have one of these, because that's one of the most important thing. So let's get a little bit of flour here, and then under, touch it, one shot, boom, and then put it on top, just like that. Flip it over on top of the dough. And take a look at the dough. Outstanding. So a couple of times in the flour, just like that. Little bit of flour in the center, and then upside down, so the top stays on top all the time. Now let's go ahead and let's press the air to the crust. Now let's press, just press. Wow, I feel so much air. So like this, press, press, press. Now flip it over one more time. If the dough is sticky, go ahead and put a little bit of flour, just like that. Like this, press the air. Now flip it over one more time. And now with your right hand, you press, left hand, you pull. Like this. Press hand and pull. Press, pull. Press and pull. So basically, like you see here, we have all the air to the crust. This is not dough, it's air. So one time, when you have about 8 inches, sorry, or 10, go ahead and put it on top. Take off all the flour, and now with one hand, go ahead and do this. Boom, boom, boom. The ends down, and then you make it larger like this, and then boom, down. The top part stays on top. So we have to give it 2 times the cook, because the oven cooks at low temperature. So we have to go ahead and put just the tomato sauce, just the base. So how you put it on the peel is just pinch it and then boom, peel under. Very simple. Do the same thing with a sheet pan if you don't have a peel. Let's make a little bit large, and now let's go ahead and let's put the pizza in the oven. The pizza stone has been warming up already 1 hour. Let's go ahead and let's put it in the oven. Gently, then once it's a bit of that, boom, one shot. Now close it right away. So now we're gonna cook the dough until it's about gold color. And then we're going to put all the other ingredients. Okay, the pizza is nice golden color. Let's take it out. Woo! Parmesan cheese and fresh mozzarella. Now let's go ahead, let's put more olive oil and then ready to go back in the oven. Until the mozzarella starts to bubble and the pizza is ready.
And when the gas tank of my pizza oven is empty, then of course I have to use the home oven too. And just wanted to say that you can change things up. You can bake the cheese with the tomato sauce instantly, directly, without first baking it with tomato sauce. It depends on how thick you cut the mozzarella and stuff. So you try, fail, improve, change, you know. The pizza oven has also been preheating for the last 30 minutes. It reached temperature. So now we put the semola or semolina on the counter, and this is much better than flour because first of all it tastes better. Secondly, it gives the pizza a nicer crunch, and also it prevents the dough from sticking and it doesn't burn in the oven like flour does. And we put the semola to basically loosening all the contact points of the dough with the semola. Use enough semola, and then we take our dough scraper to remove the pizza dough from the tray. As you can see, I put a little more semola, and now with a fast motion, we take the dough out of the tray and put it upside down on the semola. Now I turn it upside down, and now we start pressing and forming the crust with our fingers. Not like fingertips, but as you can see, we press the air out and form our crust from bottom to top to the sides, 180 degrees. And again, we continue by doing that. And you can see the dough doesn't come back together. It stays like that. And that is how the dough must be. If it comes back together, that means it's stressed and you haven't let it rest long enough. And any bubbles that are formed in the dough, you pop them. You don't want these bubbles, otherwise they will burn, they will rise in the oven and burn. And you don't want any excessive semola, so here you see me shaking the semola off the dough and pushing all the semola back to the side so the counter is nice and empty. And like that, we basically let gravity do its job. And we see through the dough, we see any thin spots, we turn the dough and we basically just stretch the dough with our knuckles. And as I said, the gravity does most of the job. And when it's long enough, or big enough, not long enough, we place it on the counter. We take our spoon with some tomato sauce, not too much, don't overdo it. And yeah, put it evenly on our pizza. And from this point on, you need to be fast, because when you put the tomato sauce on your pizza dough, it will start sticking. And yeah, you don't want to let it for too long on the counter, otherwise it will be hard to put it into the oven. And as you can see, I put some semola on my pizza peel. This is a large pizza peel, a 14-inch pizza peel. And I shaked all the semola off. This was just to, you know, any wet spots, the semola made it dry. And That is the easiest method, to take it with your fingers, take the dough to you, and with the peel, with short motions, take the pizza on there, and we stretch it like that on the peel, basically. You can stretch it just like that.
This look very simple, but you need to get the right techniques. So halfway, and then it goes up again. So halfway and pull it up, and then you stretching, give a nice stretch like that.
Now you can see I add some mozzarella after I stretch the pizza on the peel. Now you may ask, why do I do that? Because after we stretch the pizza on our pizza peel, we might have created some empty spots who do not have any tomato sauce or any mozzarella on there. And you have to imagine it's similar to when baking like bread, for example. It will rise up, right? And if you don't have any weight and anything on there, when you put the pizza in your hot oven, the dough will start rising. So it will create bubbles or a bubble which will burn. And yeah, that's not nice. It will destroy your pizza. You don't want that. Therefore, when you have like spots that are empty, you just put some mozzarella on there. And if the pizza creates bubbles while baking, you either have stretched the pizza wrongly and created too thin spots, or you have left the pizza with like these empty spots, and therefore, yeah, bubbles started arising. These are the two options. And that's why, for example, when you do a marinara with basically just tomato sauce, some oregano and stuff, you put more tomato sauce on there so you don't create those bubbles that would burn in the oven. Now, these two videos, I would encourage you to look at them one by one and check them individually. First the left one and then the right one, because these videos are for two different instances. One, when you build a hole or make a hole while stretching the dough, and the other video is while already having the ingredients on the pizza, you realize that you have a hole in the dough. When you have all the ingredients on the pizza, then the probably most challenging part comes of putting the pizza into the oven, especially for beginning with pizza baking. And this for me is the safest method to do.
Now, as you can tell, our pizza stone isn't actually that bad, so we thought we'll have a bit of fun with this video. We're going to spread some tomatoes, some cheese on there, get it really, really dirty, bake all that on, and then clean it off again. Okay, so we'll get a bit of tomato on there, spread that around. Cheese is always falling off the pizza. Get some of that on there. Always spilling a bit of cornmeal as well, or a bit of flour. Mix that all in, make a right old mess on here, and then let's cook that at a high temperature to really bake it on. Our stone's nice and dirty. We've turned the oven on. We're going to bake all that on there and then see how it looks. So as you can see, our pizza stone is now nicely messed up. Now, if your pizza stone looks something like this, all we're going to do is put the pizza stone back in and turn the heat up to the highest level. Now, if you've got a gas oven, it's nice and easy. All you do is turn that up to the highest setting. If you're using wood or charcoal, fill the basket up nice and full, put some wood chunks on top, heat it up really hot and leave it for 30 minutes. So we're going to check back in 30 minutes and see how this looks. So we've had our pizza oven running at high temperature for about 30 minutes now. As you can see, all of that food has now turned to a burned on, crispy char that's just going to brush right off. So I recommend getting one of these from Uni. It's a wire brush with a scraper on the end. We're going to scrape away all the big chunks of food and then brush it, and you'll see how clean it ends up afterwards. So we're going to scrape some of that food just to loosen it all up. And then use our brush to brush it all to the side. Now, as you can see, that's already looking much, much better. But if you've still got some black spots on your pizza stone, leave it for another 10 minutes and then give it another brush. It'll come up looking lovely. So it's very, very easy to clean your pizza stone. If you're pushed for time and you want a quicker way to do it, there is a really simple way. All you have to do is just pull the pizza stone out when it's cool, of course, flip it over and put it back in. Over the next few cooks, that pizza stone's going to clean on the top and the bottom, and it'll come out looking amazing.
When baking pizza in the pizza oven, it is very important that when we turn the pizza, we always place it on the same position. We don't just change the positions, because different spots are harder than where we originally placed the pizza, because the pizza stone automatically cooled down. And we turn it to cook it equally, and we always check the bottom too, so it doesn't burn. Also, I wanted to talk about ovens or pizza ovens in general and my oven. And yes, the oven itself makes a huge difference when baking pizza, because even when you have perfect dough and you've done everything perfect, it is impossible for you to get close to the results, for example, in a regular home oven versus even like the oven I'm using right now, the Oni Karu 16. You simply can't. So yeah, ovens for baking pizza play a tremendous role on your pizza results. And that is why I also wanted to talk about my oven and share some thoughts. The oven I'm using, as I said, is the Oni Karu 16, and I've been using it now for around one year or so, like probably 1 year, yeah. Started doing pizzas around 1.5 years ago. Started in the regular oven and then changed to the Oni Karu 16. And this is a dual fuel oven, so you can, well, bake with wood or with gas. But for me personally, I always use gas because it is a little bit hard for me in the place I live in to bake with wood due to the smell, right? I don't want to bother the people, so I use the gas variant. But now the big point for me, if you plan on using the oven with wood, then I definitely recommend the Oni Karu 16. If you plan to use the oven solely with gas or mostly with gas, then I wouldn't suggest you necessarily the Oni Karu 16, because there are better choices out there. And don't understand me wrong, this is a decent oven. But, for example, when you look at the flame, you see the Oni Karu, the flame just rises, like comes from the top. It just comes from the top, and well, this has huge effects on how the pizza bakes. And when you compare it, for example, with the Gosney Dome, which is really a very great oven, the Gosney Dome, and also the Gosney Dome S1, which is just a gas oven and a lot cheaper than the Gosney Dome, which is also a dual fuel, so wood and gas. But whether you're using wood or gas, the flame in the Gosney oven rises a lot more naturally, just like traditional professional pizza ovens. It comes from the side and curves upwards. So the results in the Gosney Dome or also the Gosney S1 are simply much better than when comparing to the Onikaru. So if you are ready to invest in a top tier pizza oven right now from the start, and you have the passion, you love making pizza, and you have the money, and yeah, want to invest in a dual fuel oven, then I would suggest you get the Gosney Dome and not the Onikaru 16. If you plan on using wood and don't have a too high budget, then buy the Onikaru 16. It's much cheaper than the Gosney Dome and still a huge upgrade from the regular home pizza oven. If you just plan on solely baking your pizza on gas, I would suggest that you buy the Gosney Dome S1 or the Gosney Arc XL and not the Onikaru 16. That's just what I wanted to share with you because I find it important. Oven is important. And just so you know, I'm not getting paid. I'm not in a partnership with Dome. These are purely my thoughts. I try to, well, help you out so you learn some stuff and you learn what to look after when buying an oven and don't just spend your money. But as I said, I'm very happy with the Onikaru. It makes great pizzas. I just, wanted to still share the downs of the oven, which I haven't thought of when I first bought the oven. And yes, definitely, I think that when you search the oven, it doesn't have to be a dome. I'm sure there are plenty of other ovens out there which I haven't even heard of. But if you plan on buying an oven, take some time, investigate, search things up, and also look at the flame, because this is something I didn't pay attention and I didn't really even notice when buying the oven. And I do think that the flame is a very central point and very important point when you choose the oven. But as I said, the Onikaru overall, when you start off and you want different results. I mean, you've seen the pizza, and I'm gonna continue showing you the pizza. It is a good pizza. It is great results. You can't compare the results at all with a home oven. But still, I just wanted to be honest and maybe help you out a little bit with the decision. And yeah, that's all. So we continue baking the pizza, and now it's already done. The bottom looks pretty good. And yeah, one more pizza. I'm going to show you how I turn it. Just, yeah, bake it equally, turn it, and check the bottom. And just so I mention it, For example, sometimes you can on purpose change the position of the pizza when you see the top is cooked already pretty well and the bottom not really. So then on purpose I place it more on the left or on the right, so the bottom cooks faster too, and when the pizza is ready, everything top and bottom is perfectly cooked. And this is a different recording from the last time, and when you hear those sounds on the dough, these are air bubbles that are being popped, and this is a very good sign, and you should stop kneading and check the gluten structure. Maybe your dough is ready. So this is the exact same recipe too, the exact same ingredients, exact same process, everything is the same. Here I'm pushing all the air out of the crust, and as you can see, you can also make like very thin crust pizzas by that. Or you can also make like medium crust, that is what I like. I don't like huge crusts. You can also make huge crust, but medium crust is perfect for me. Airy, puffy, you can hear it. And here I wanted to show you all of these pizzas. I used a different mozzarella. I always sometimes change the mozzarellas. This was a fior di latte mozzarella, which was already chopped up, so I didn't have to cut it. But as you can see, all the pizzas burned. The mozzarella has burned in the oven, and this can have two reasons. Either the mozzarella, you have cut the mozzarella too thin, so therefore it burned in the oven, and next time you need to cut it thicker, or the mozzarella can't withstand those high temperatures. So as you can see, 220 degrees Celsius, preheating the oven on fan mode, and when the oven is hot, then you take the pizzas, put them in the oven for around 5 to 8 minutes, and they are like fresh. And here I decided to check the inside and show it. And you can see the cornicione is not the best one, it's not extraordinary, but at least you can see the air bubbles are not only in the cornicione but also till the very top of the pizza, and that is a good sign. Alright, so here we are. This is pCloud, and if you watched the previous video of my panettone recipe, this will already look familiar to you. So yeah, basically you can see the link up here. I will also put the link in the video description and in the comment section, so you can simply copy paste the link into your web browser and you will be redirected to the exact same page as you can see I am right now. So this is the folder and this is the file. So we click on the file, this opens, and of course, as it is an Excel file, you need to download it so it truly shows and works as it should. We open the file, press on editing, close that up, and we change to the first sheet. This is the important one, the first one. Now, first of all, everything is in German, I know, and I'm sorry for that, as I originally have created this file to help, like, yeah, the German people out here, you know. But still, I think that at least for the important part, you don't need to speak German or understand German. Now, of course, if you want to know what it says here or here, you may want to just, I don't know, like nowadays you can simply make a screenshot, upload it somewhere on ChatGPT, for example, and it will translate everything for you. Or you can simply just copy paste everything and yeah, translate it in DeepL or wherever. But for now, I will focus on this part here, which is the important part, and especially like this one. This one is basically the recipe, well, my favorite recipe and the recipe you saw in the video. So this is with olive oil, and this is basically the same recipe but without olive oil. Everything stays the same, like so also the dough fermentation and the whole process, everything is exactly the same, just that here you have olive oil and here you don't, and here you have with sourdough. So you can also do the exact same thing with sourdough. Sauerteig means sourdough. And well, extra virgin olive oil, this is pretty clear, right? Salz means salt, Wasser means water, Mehl means flour, and yeah, Hefe means yeast. All right. So when you have sourdough starter and you want to do pizza with it, you can. It makes excellent pizza, and if you can try it out. You use 6% of starter, and this 6% of starter behave pretty much the same as 0.1% of fresh yeast. So the dough fermentation, the bulk fermentation, the bolt fermentation, and the whole process and the length stays the same actually. And also I have a little recipe here, also in German. Again, I'm sorry, you have to copy paste it like that, or control A, control C, and you know. But yeah, if you don't have a starter, if you're new to starter, how can you build a starter, how to refresh it, you know, and tips like that. Hydration, what is it, how does it work, how to refresh, when is the starter active, how often must I refresh it, what to do when you leave for holidays, and stuff like that. Well, anyways, so now I want to show you how to work with this file. And of course, you can save the file on your desktop and change everything up as you like. But yeah, we will look at this now, first of all. And you can see here are 1000 grams of flour. Basically, as we said, these are 6 pizzas. And let's say next time you want to scale the recipe up and you want to do 12 pizzas. So you click on here and you simply put 2000, no letters, just the number. Everything is formatted correctly, automatically. So you just have to type it like that and everything changes, as you can see. So yeah, you just don't need to calculate anything. You can change this stuff up. You can also make, for example, 3 pizzas. So you type it in, and yeah, that's how it works, right? Now, also the same, of course, works for everything else. You can 2000, 500, whatever, right? Yeah. So this is the first step. This is just a short explanation of how the file works. Now we want to look at the hydration. So you can see this is 64% of hydration. So when someone speaks about hydration, in case you didn't know or you didn't properly understood, so that simply means when someone says this dough has a hydration of 64%, it means that the water equals 64% of the flour. Because the total amount of flour is always 100%, right? Flour is always 100%. Let me change that 2000 back. So now, as the flour is 100%, when we talk about a hydration of 64%, we look at the amount of flour. So 64% of 1000 grams is 640 milliliters of water. When someone says his dough has a hydration of 70%, that's how it changes, right? So 1000 grams is 100%. This is the flour. The water is the hydration, right? In this case. So 70% hydrated means 700 milliliters. As 70% of 1000 grams is 700 milliliters. So that's how it works. And to make it even clearer, if someone says he made a hydration of 100%, this means 1000 grams of flour and equal amount of water, as the flour, the total amount of flour is 1000 grams, right? And 100%. So 1000 milliliters of water. And that's basically what hydration is, right? And now for this one, here you don't only have the water as a liquid, but also the 3% in this case of the extra virgin olive oil. So now you don't just have 64% of water, but you have 61% of water plus this 3% of the oil equals 64%, right? So for example, now this is, and of course with the sourdough, as you can see, it is pretty much the same thing. It's the same recipe as this one with olive oil, but yeah, with sourdough starter and not with yeast. Now if you want to change things up, for protection reasons, I changed things up. I put on a sheet protection, all right? For different cells, for example, if you want to change this thing, you can't. Or that one, you can't, right? So you don't mistakenly change things up. But if you want to change things, and for example, you want to delete this one, you can. But maybe if you want to delete this one, you can't. So if you want to change those things up and edit the file, you just go up and you can see how to deactivate the sheet protection. You go up here on checking or check and you tap on remove sheet protection and you type in pizza, just as you can see it right here. Press OK and here you go. You can delete this too, no problem. Now you can edit the file as you desire. So now what I want to look at with you is hydration and how the hydration changes things. So the hydration, right? You can see 64%. Now, concerning this whole recipe, I tried different hydrations. I got up to 80% of hydration, which I do not recommend as it is very watery, very sticky, and very hard to handle. For pizza, it is too much. And I definitely do not recommend you try it out, especially if you are beginning with pizza. But for example, you can maybe try 70%, although I do not recommend to use that either when you are beginning. As I said, I tried different hydrations. 80 was my highest. I also did 70%. I also did 68 and different stuff. But for me personally, I shared my favorite recipe, which simply is 64% of liquid, of water in this case, or yeah, 64% in total with the water and the 3% of extra virgin olive oil. also, if you want to change, if you like this recipe, because as I said, I always try different stuff. I try different amounts of the ingredients, different seasonings also for the tomato sauce and stuff, different mozzarellas, and the same is also for the dough, right? So, for example, this 3% is something that I just find the best, to work the best, to give the best taste. And yeah, you can also do it, as I said, without olive oil. Me personally, and many people, by the way, traditionally do the dough without olive oil. Now, me personally, I tried both multiple times, and I definitely think that with olive oil, the dough is much better. It is a much nicer taste. I don't know, it makes a difference. So I do recommend, or my personal favorite is that one with olive oil. So I'm sticking with olive oil and not without. So yeah, but when changing like the hydration, for example, let's say you want to try out 68%. I would suggest that you just change this one to 65, right? 65 plus 3, 68%. I wouldn't change this one. I would let the extra virgin olive oil on 3%, but you can also go lower. You can go 2% or 1%. I just found 3% to be perfect. So when I want a higher hydration, I change the water and I don't go up percentage-wise with the oil. All right. Now, does hydration affect your fermentation? Yes, it does. So let's say, I will take now this as an example, as you can see it easier. Let's say you change the hydration to 70%. Now, in my recipe, in the video, you saw I had a bulk fermentation of 11 hours 30 to 12 hours, and also then a bald fermentation of another 9 hours. When you do 70%, this length of the fermentation will change. And if you do the exact same amount of time, if you let the dough rest that long, it will over ferment, it will overproof, and you don't want that. Because, now comes the clue, the more water you use in your dough, so the higher hydration you use, the faster the dough will ferment. And, for example, the lower hydration you use, the slower the fermentation process. So you need to let the dough rest longer till it is ready to use. It needs more time to ferment. But with higher hydration, this time it goes faster, so it doesn't need that much time. So the more hydration you use, the faster it ferments, the dough ferments. So that is something you need to keep in mind. When you change the hydrations, also the fermentation changes, right? Now, secondly, I also want to look at room temperature and how you need to adapt or can adapt to hot temperature or cold temperatures. For example, you may have a hot summer day and a room temperature of 28 degrees Celsius. Now, for example, when you normally and regularly you have a temperature of 24 degrees, right? 24 degrees Celsius, and your dough totally needs 21 hours to ferment. This is the total time, let's say. Now, when the temperature is hotter, the dough will ferment faster. So the 21 hours will be too long for this higher temperature, room temperature, because the hotter the environment or the room temperature is, the faster the dough will ferment, because the yeast becomes more active. So, in a cold day, you need to let the dough rest for longer. When it is winter and maybe 80 degrees Celsius, maybe you need to let the dough rest for 24 hours, right? Instead of 21 hours total time. So, and that's how people adapt their recipes every day, basically. When you do this professionally, and let's say you have a pizzeria or something, and you run a business, on some days, for example, when, let's say normally you use 64%. Now tomorrow, it will be a very hot day. And when you do the dough, it will ferment on a much, or in a hotter temperature than normal. So it's not 22 degrees anymore, but for example 25. So many people, first of all, go down with the hydration a little bit. So you can change the hydration, because as I said, the lower the hydration, the slower the fermentation. So they don't go down with the hydration. And what I like to do, and of course you have to adapt, is the yeast. So sometimes in a hot day, if you want to push the fermentation, for example, up to 24 hours room temperature, you need to adapt the yeast level. 1 gram of yeast would be too much. So maybe sometimes you would need 0.4 grams of yeast in 1000 grams of flour. So you can really push the fermentation up to 24 hours. If you use 1 grams of yeast in a hot environment, then yeah, your dough will be done much quicker. And if you let it proof like normally, it will overproof. And as I said, you don't want the dough to overproof. You want it to be perfectly ready then when you need to bake the dough. And this is something you will learning by doing, learning by experience, right? But anyways, yeah, let's leave it like that. For now, doesn't matter. Now, also another thing. You see me using fresh yeast. I always say fresh yeast. Why fresh yeast and not dry yeast? Simply, I used dry yeast many times and my dough failed because the dry yeast failed. Reason is, when you have dry yeast, you cannot tell whether the yeast is still good or not, whether you can still use it, whether it's still active, or you need to throw it away and buy a new one. You cannot tell that with dry yeast. But with fresh yeast, you can always tell. When you look at the yeast, you know whether it is good or not, whether you need to throw it away and buy a new one, or you can use it. With the dry yeast, you don't know till you realize, after you kneaded the dough and let it rest, and you see the dough basically failed and stayed flat. Well, then you know that the dry yeast didn't work anymore as it should, and basically you need to buy a new one. That's why I never recommend using dry yeast. Never. Always fresh yeast. If you want to use dry yeast though, let's say here you have 1 grams, right? 0.1%, 1 grams of fresh yeast. If you would use, in this example, on 1000 grams of flour, dry yeast instead of fresh yeast, it would be 0.33 grams of dry yeast or so. Because dry yeast is always about 1/3 less than fresh yeast. So when you use 1 grams of fresh yeast, you use like 3 times less for dry yeast. So 0.33 grams, around that. That is also something important to know. Also important to know, you may see many YouTube videos out there that use like huge amounts of yeast. And now maybe 1 grams to you sounds very low, which it is. It is a good amount of yeast. It is a low amount, and you want to use a low amount because you want the pizza or also the bread, right? You want to be, but now talking about pizza, you want the pizza to be light, just light, you know, light and good for your stomach. And if you have like huge amounts of yeast and just let it ferment for 5 hours and then bake the pizza and eat it, it is not good for you. It is not good for your stomach. Therefore, we use low amounts of yeast and we ferment it for longer, right? And on room temperature, of course, it is the fastest way. Now, this is the fastest way, basically. If you do everything on room temperature, this recipe here is the fastest way and the healthiest way of doing it. You can even go down, right? You can even go a little lower than that if you want to push the fermentation to 24 hours or so. But yeah, also a big bonus point when using low yeast level. For example, you can play around. You don't need, if you don't want to. For example, let's say you kneaded your dough and now you feel like you made your pizza balls and everything is ready to bake, but for some reason something just you don't want to make the pizza right now. So you can just take your pizza box with the doughs or whatever you used, place them in the fridge and let them there for another day and basically use them the next day with this low amount of yeast. If you use larger amounts of yeast, of course, then also the fridge doesn't really help you because the dough will still, even though in the fridge on 4 degrees, which is cold, and as I said, right, remember, the hotter, the faster the dough ferments, the colder, the slower the dough ferments. So when playing around with the fridge, you can take this recipe up. You know, you can knead the dough, bulk ferment it at room temperature, make the dough balls, and then let them rest in the fridge for 24 hours. Just something important to note here: if you use the dough, if you want to use the dough balls to spread them out and make pizza and put them in the hot oven, and before using them, take them out of the fridge for at least, at the very least minimum, 30 minutes. Better for around 2 to 4 hours. It very much depends on how long you let the dough ferment in the fridge. But it is good and a must do to let the fridge to let the dough come a little bit on room temperature, rest on room temperature, not use it instantly after you've taken the dough out of the fridge. At least 30 minutes is a must, but better 2 to 4 hours. And just also something to keep in mind, when you put the dough in the fridge, basically the whole fermentation process slows down in comparison to room temperature for at least, for the minimum, 3 times. So in the fridge, 3 times slower at the very minimum. maybe 4 times slower, maybe 5 times slower. It depends on your room temperature. But at the very least, for around, for example, 20 degrees Celsius room temperature, yeah, for the very least 3 times slower in the fridge than on room temperature. And that's how you can play around. You can place your dough in the fridge if you don't want to use it right now. And yeah, just play around a little bit like that. Now, also what I wanted to mention is the salt. Salt, you can see here 2.85%, always the same for me. That is also something I tried multiple times, different amounts of salt. You can go up to 3% if you want to, so up to 3%. But for me personally, 2.85% was the best, or is the best, and I always use 2.85%, and I shared the recipe. Yeah, well, my favorite recipe, right, with the right amounts of everything, which I just tried out, experienced, and found to be now the best. So yeah, but if you want, you can also go up with the salt, as I said. And this also depends, first of all, also on your mozzarella and how salty the mozzarella is, but also just on your personal taste, you know. Now, I think the most important part is set. Now, something noteworthy to mention is also, well, the time of fermentation, especially if you ferment it for like 48 hours or so, or just for long periods of time. Like, you know, I wouldn't suggest you overdo it, you know, like, you know, 30 hours, probably you can do that, right? 30 hours should be good. You should be good. But now we will have a short look on the Biga recipe. And this one you can basically ignore. This again is just something mostly for the people that haven't watched the video. Some equipment, but you saw the equipment I used, then how I do my sauce and how I do my mozzarella. And yeah, that is basically something I've shown you in the video. So now for the Biga recipe. There are different Biga recipes. Some do 100% Biga, some do 60% Biga, whatever, right? This is an 80% Biga recipe. Now, you can see up here, it is 48 hours. Of course, here again, you can play around. This is solely fridge fermentation. That is why it's 48 hours. But you can also change things up and make the Biga and put it in the fridge. And when you have the dough and make the dough balls, you can let them rest at room temperature and not in the fridge, right? Then it would be shorter. But when you really want to push the fermentation at its peak and just use solely the fridge, then you have to pay attention to the flour here. But for now, first of all, if you don't know what Biga is, that looks something like this. That is basically Biga. Basically a pre-fermentation. A pre-fermentation. So 80% of Biga simply means the Biga contains 80% of the total amount of flour. So the total amount of flour is 1250 grams. For the Biga, we use 1000 grams. And the 1000 grams is 80% of the 1250 grams of the total amount of flour, which is 100%. Right? Of course, here too, right, you can change things up if you want to, but for now, I will leave it as it is. And water-wise, you can change the hydration too, but I will leave that one too. But if you change it, of course, just like that, and everything will automatically change and calculate the ingredients for you. So now 80% of Biga, so 1000 grams of flour. Water, it is a hydration of 50%. And now the 50% is now for the Biga, right? So 50% of 1000 grams, 500 milliliters. Yeast, 0.05%. Or just 0.75 grams. So basically what you do for the Biga, you don't need a mixer. You can just use your hands, and you don't have, you don't need to knead the dough and get a dough ball like you saw it, like it looks like that. You basically just mix the flour with the yeast and the water, all the water at once. You take your hand, you mix it somewhere in a bowl or so, you mix it together, and you will have like little chunks of dough, and that is all you need. And then you close it up airtight and put it in the fridge for around 24 hours, for example. And after, or wait, something important now to mention when we are talking about the Biga. Now in the Biga, as if we do the 48 hours or so fridge fermentation, which will be very long, if we just use like 1000 grams, or if we just use white flour or type 00 flour, in such long periods of time of fermentation, the gluten will eventually get so weak that it breaks. And when you try then to bake your pizza, you will have a bad result, because then your dough will have lots of black spots on it, and it just won't be good because your gluten was weak. So to help the gluten hold its structure and its stability and its strength, we add around 10 to 15% of a stronger flour. For example, a type 1 or a Manitoba flour. So, and this is also something you can start off and try it out. Now, I, for example, would use, instead of 1000 grams of type 00 flour or white flour, I would use 900 grams of type 00 flour or white flour with at least just 12 grams of protein. You should pay attention to that, 12 grams of protein. And the other 100 grams, I would use type 1 flour, basically, yeah. So I would use 10% of a stronger flour and 90% of the normal flour. So 900 grams plus 100 grams equals 1000 grams. So yeah, that for the Biga. Now, we have kneaded the Biga, we use type 1 flour or Manitoba flour. You can also use Manitoba flour. You can also go up to 15%, 15%. Yeah, you can start with 10 if you see, I don't know, next time you use 15%, right? You can use Manitoba flour, you can use type 1 flour, just use a stronger flour. Then, once you take, after, let's say 24 hours, you take the Biga out of the fridge, and yeah, maybe you let it rest for like 30 minutes or so. Then, basically you make your main dough, and now you can use your mixer. So you put the Biga in the mixer, you add all of the flour, which is still remaining, right? Because we used 80% Biga, so 20% is still left. So 1000 plus 250 equals 1250, right? And the same for water. 350 milliliters left. In the Biga we used 500 milliliters. Total water is 850 milliliters for 68% hydration. So 500 plus 350 equals 850 milliliters of water total amount, right? So now, first of all, we put the Biga inside the machine and we add not all the water, just as before, just as you saw in the video, we keep some water behind for later. So we can add it later slowly, right? So we add some water, like 2/3 or so. And we also add the flour. And now for the yeast, I have two options here, but there would be three options. Well, let's see. The first option is you just use, again, fresh yeast. You would use 50 grams, for example. Or you can also use sourdough starter with fresh yeast combined. Of course, the measurements of the yeast is lower than if you use just yeast. But yeah, of course. And also the third option would be you just use sourdough starter, which I have not included here, but you can do it, right? But for now, let's say we use just fresh yeast. So you have the Biga in the bowl, you have all of the flour in the bowl, you put the yeast in the bowl, and like 2/3 of the water. And the salt, you keep it. You don't put it inside the bowl yet. So you just mix those three ingredients, or four ingredients. Biga, flour, water, yeast. Start mixing at a low speed, and yeah, just as you saw basically in the video, right? And then you can slowly increase the speed a little bit, right? And when everything comes together and the water is absorbed well by the flour, yeah, you can either add a little more water first before adding the salt, or if you don't have too much water left, then you can just add the salt, and when you add the salt, also add some water, and then you can mix it at the higher speed for 2 to 3 minutes on a really on a high speed, and then after the salt dissolves in the dough and gets absorbed well, you can slow down the machine again a little bit, right? And yeah, just mix it till it's good and till you have all the water in the dough. So if you still have water left after all the water is absorbed, you keep adding water slowly. And yeah, until all of the water is absorbed, and you check always the temperature. It's the same as in the recipe, checking temperature, and when it's done, you should have a strong gluten structure. So you do the window pane test, and you should be able to see through without the dough tearing. And once you have that, you take the dough out of the machine, and then everything is basically the same. You just build some strength, so you make some coil foils, and you strengthen the gluten. And after you've done that and you have like a big dough ball, you can simply either put the dough ball in something airtight, like a bowl or so, and cover it airtight, or you can cover it with a damp cloth for around 1 hour. This is the simplest method now, to cover it for around 1 hour, just so the dough after kneading, it's very stressed, like, you know, so you need to let it rest a little bit, so then you can make the balls. So after 1 hour, the dough is nicely relaxed, so then you can start portioning the dough, so weighting the dough, as we've done, and form dough balls. And you can place these dough balls either in a pizza box or wherever you place them, just close them, seal them airtight, and from there you can put them in the fridge, right? You can put them in the fridge for around 24 hours or so, And or you can also let them rest for around 1 hour on room temperature still, and then place them in the fridge. You can play around, but you can place them instantly in the fridge for around 24 hours or so, and then take them out. And yeah, just as I said before, using them, make sure to let them like come to temperature a little bit on room temperature out of the fridge, and not use them instantly after you take them out of the fridge. But yeah, as I said, also you just observe the dough, right? Maybe you need to change some things up. Maybe after you've taken them out of the fridge, they are still small, because the fridge, I don't know, as I said, it slows down the whole fermentation process a lot. And maybe you have to let them rest a little longer on room temperature, so they really yeah, are doubled in size and airy and yeah, ready just to make pizza. So you just observe, you learn the dough. You this is something that doesn't just come like that. You make mistakes, which is normal, and through those mistakes you accompany like knowledge and experience and expertise, and you know how to handle the dough, you know how the dough reacts in different stages, and you just get to know the whole process, right? And so that is how you improve. And at some point you will just be like sure and know the dough and know how the yeast works and know how to do it the best for you. And yeah, then you will be able to really control the dough. So let's say you want to have pizza, you want to make pizza the next day at evening. You will know when you have to start, how long you need to let it rest, how much yeast you have to use, if you want to use also the fridge in between, right? That's all something that comes by time. But if you try the recipe, this I would suggest you start doing this one, especially with 64% of hydration, right? That is how it's done. This was the original recipe I used from the video, and this is the one I prefer, and yeah, I basically do always. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to write a comment, and I will try to respond. And other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope you will have great results.